Hello, this is Dr. Grande. Today's question is, can I analyze the case of Venus and Doug Stewart? Just a reminder, I'm not diagnosing anybody in this video, only speculating about what could be happening in a situation like this. If you enjoyed this video, please like it, subscribe to my channel, and consider supporting me on Patreon. I will put the link to Patreon in the description for this video. First, I'll look at the background of this case, move to the timeline of the crime, then offer my analysis. Venus Stewart was born on August 4, 1977, in Coldwater, Michigan. She'd lived with her father, Larry, and her mother, Therese. After graduating from high school, Venus earned a bachelor's degree and had dreams about working in law enforcement. In 2002, she met a man named Douglas Harry Stewart, who was about 4 years younger than her. He went by the name Doug. The couple became romantically involved and quickly married, which was concerning to some of Venus's family members. Doug was serving in the Marines, but he left in 2003 because Venus was worried about him getting killed. The couple moved into a house in Schoolcraft, Michigan, which is about 44 miles west of Coldwater. Venus worked in the fraud department of a bank. Doug worked for an Applebee's restaurant and a Pizza Hut restaurant. By 2006, the couple had 2 daughters. Venus made a lot more money than Doug, so he stayed home and cared for his daughters as Venus continued to work. Doug spent a lot of time playing on his Xbox. The couple had a volatile relationship and did not appear to have any clear plan about the direction for their lives. Venus thought it would be a good idea for the family to make a major move. She wanted to find the perfect place. Ultimately, she decided that the family should move to Newport News, Virginia, because it was close to the European-themed adventure park, Busch Gardens, Williamsburg. Newport News has a reputation for being crime-challenged. It seems like an unusual place to select if one is searching for a utopia. The family lived in an apartment, and Doug found work as a truck driver. The relationship between Venus and Doug did not improve. In February 2010, Venus took her daughters and drove 735 miles to Cologne, Michigan, where her parents lived. Doug was confused by her departure and even went to the police to report her missing. He was told that she left and had no plans on returning. The distance between them was so great, it felt like Venus was living on Mars. Not long after this, Venus was awarded custody of her 2 daughters, but Doug continued to fight for custody. Now moving to the timeline of the crime. On April 26, 2010, Venus's father, Larry, called 911 and said that his daughter was missing. Her mother, Therese, had last seen her at around 6 a.m. At about 8 a.m., Larry was awakened by Venus's 2 daughters playing unsupervised. Venus's vehicle was still out front, and her purse, keys, and phone were inside the house. Here's what the police found during the course of their investigation. The gravel driveway to the house was disrupted, as if there had been a struggle. A pink hair tie was found, as well as the empty package for a tarp. Doug was the obvious suspect. The police contacted him that night. He explained to them that during the time of the disappearance, he was at his attorney's office in Virginia making a payment for the ongoing custody dispute. Doug said the attorney wasn't there, but 2 secretaries saw him drop off the payment. Investigators spoke to the secretaries, who confirmed that Doug had stopped by the office and made a payment that day. The confirmation of Doug's alibi did not discourage the police from investigating him as a suspect. They were still very suspicious of Doug. They visited his apartment in Newport News and seized his computers. Doug was cooperative. He explained to the police that he thought Venus simply ran away. When the police searched Doug's pickup truck, they found a receipt from a Walmart store in Van Wert, Ohio, which is about 2 hours south of Cologne, Michigan. Van Wert is along one of the routes that a person might take if they were driving from Newport News to Cologne. The receipt was for a shovel, gloves, a hat, and a tarp. The tarp matched the tarp package that was found outside the house where Venus had been staying when she disappeared. Surveillance video from Walmart showed Doug purchasing the items on April 25, 2010, 1 day before Venus's disappearance. An employee at the store remembered Doug. She indicated that before he made his purchase, he asked if the store sold lime. This is a curious request, considering there is a popular belief that lime speeds up the decomposition of human bodies. In reality, studies have shown that it actually slows down decomposition, although it does reduce the odor. Investigators decided to examine Doug's alibi more closely. They interviewed the secretaries of the law office again. They told the officers that Doug had entered the office wearing a baseball cap and large sunglasses. He also had a hood pulled over his head. He never made eye contact, did not make small talk, and left without his receipt. As the secretaries thought about it more, they realized they weren't actually sure the person they saw was Doug Stewart. The police wondered if Doug had conspired with somebody to impersonate him in order to establish an alibi. Looking through Doug's phone records, they found that he made a number of calls to a 20-year-old man named Ricky Spencer, who lived in Bear, Delaware. This is about 4.5 hours north of Newport News. Both men had turned off their cell phones before Venus disappeared and reactivated them afterward. The police traveled to Delaware and interviewed Ricky Spencer. After initially denying any wrongdoing, he confessed to a crime. Here is what Ricky told the officers. Ricky first met Doug online in 2008 when they were playing Xbox Live. On April 1, 2010, Ricky visited Doug's apartment in Newport News, Virginia, and stayed there for a few days. This was just supposed to be a vacation for Ricky, a way to have fun and hang out with his friend. On the 4th day of the visit, Doug mentioned to Ricky that his wife Venus was a danger to his daughters. He needed Ricky to impersonate him to provide him an alibi while Doug drove to Michigan and murdered his wife. Ricky rejected Doug's generous offer to be a conspirator. However, Doug kept adding more details about how hazardous his wife was. He even mentioned that Venus had attempted to strangle one of his daughters. With this revelation, Ricky gave in and decided to help in the murder plot. At this point, Doug offered Ricky a crash course in how to become a master criminal. He taught him about a chokehold he intended to use to kill Venus and advised Ricky how to watch out for surveillance cameras. Ricky returned to Delaware to await further instructions. On April 15, 2010, the men met in Bethesda, Maryland, where Doug gave Ricky items that he would need to impersonate him. For example, clothing, his credit card, keys, and a cell phone. Ricky was to hang out in Doug's apartment wearing his clothing and use his credit card. As Ricky drove to Virginia, Doug drove toward Michigan, intent on committing murder. He avoided toll roads and paid cash for gasoline. As part of the plan to build an alibi, Ricky used Doug's credit card to buy food from a Wendy's restaurant. Doug abandoned the mission to murder his wife on the next day, April 16, because he was pulled over by the police in Ohio at about 4:30 a.m. They accused him of weaving across lanes. Doug realized there was now a record of him being in Ohio. Therefore, if he followed through with the murder, it would be easy to catch him. When Doug returned to Newport News, Ricky told him that he was no longer going to help him in his murder plan. Doug responded by threatening to kill everyone in the house where Venus was living. Ricky changed his mind and agreed to help. The men tried again on April 25, 2010. Doug drove to Cologne, Michigan, and waited not far from the house where Venus was living. On April 26, he called Ricky on a burner phone and told him it was time to leave the apartment and start creating the alibi. Ricky left the apartment, went to the law office, and made a payment. Later, Doug called him and said that he had killed his wife after impersonating a mailman to lure her out of the house. Doug Stewart was arrested and charged with first-degree premeditated murder and conspiracy to commit murder. Later, Doug's fingerprint was found on the tarp package that was left behind at the house where Venus was living. Ricky testified against Doug at the murder trial. On March 1, 2011, Doug Stewart was convicted on both charges. The next month, he was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. As part of his plea bargain, Ricky was allowed to plead guilty to conspiracy to commit manslaughter. He was sentenced to 1 year in jail and 3 years of probation. Ricky was released in March of 2012. Even though Doug had been convicted and sentenced to life in prison, the body of Venus had never been recovered. The police spoke to Doug in 2011 and tried to convince him to reveal the location of Venus's body, but Doug continued to maintain his innocence. They returned in 2018 and once again tried to convince Doug, speaking in hypotheticals, Doug gave the police a list of things that he wanted in exchange for his cooperation. For example, when his parents died, he wanted permission to go to their funerals. Doug desired permission to enter a canine training program and to teach classes. And finally, he wanted an Xbox for the unit. Prison officials agreed to Doug's terms. They were already going to get an Xbox for the unit, so that request did not matter. Doug admitted that he was the killer and directed the police to a wooded area where he had buried the body of his wife Venus. Her remains were found on October 22, 2018. Now moving to my analysis. Here are my thoughts on a few areas that stood out to me in this case. Item number 1. After proclaiming his innocence for years, Doug finally confessed to the murder. He said that he attacked his wife by putting her in a chokehold. When Venus was rendered unconscious, he put her in his pickup truck. He drove to a wooded area, she woke up, and they had a conversation. Venus made a statement that angered Doug, so he killed her. Talking about the murder, Doug told the media, quote, "You remember everything. I remember the smells. Everything. I think about every single second," unquote. He also said, quote, "When I tell you the story, it is going to make me a monster. I am okay with this because that's what I was 8 years ago. The story is going to make me look bad. I was wretched, cold, and calculated," unquote. Item number 2. Doug believed that he was a master criminal who could easily get away with murder. Despite this, he made a number of mistakes. For example, Doug purchased his burner phone using his credit card, which connected the phone to him. The police were able to place the phone within a few miles of the house where Venus was staying in Michigan. Doug went into the Walmart store in Ohio wearing shorts when it was cold outside. He asked for lime, which is a chemical sometimes used by people who are disposing of bodies. Doug enlisted the help of a young conspirator who he was connected to through phone records. Doug did not permanently abandon his murder plan after getting pulled over in Ohio, although he did delay it. And he left the tarp package containing his fingerprint at the scene of the crime. Item number 3. Some people believe the plea deal that Ricky received was too generous considering his level of involvement. Ricky knew that Doug intended to kill Venus. It wasn't like he believed Doug was going to Michigan to spy on her, surprise her with flowers, or engage in some other non-lethal activity. If Ricky had contacted the police when Doug approached him, he could have prevented Venus from being murdered. I think the state of Michigan was in a tough position here. Ricky clearly could have been convicted of something much more serious than he was, but they really needed his testimony against Doug. Ricky's role was restricted to assisting with the alibi. This is still conspiracy, but there is the sense that Ricky really wasn't a hardcore offender. I think the plea deal was acceptable given Ricky's level of involvement and cooperation. Item number 4. What do I think happened in this case? This is just a theory, my opinion. Doug Stewart was self-centered, impulsive, irresponsible, lazy, vindictive, immature, cold, callous, violent, manipulative, deceptive, falsely believed he was special, and had a sense of entitlement. He spent a lot of time playing Xbox. Ricky said that Doug played games with him 6 to 7 hours a day. When Venus left Doug, he decided that he would kill her. Doug had a tremendous level of confidence in his ability to escape the consequences of this murder. His plan to have Ricky impersonate him almost worked, but Doug made too many mistakes. After being convicted of the murder, Doug was defiant. He never intended on admitting his guilt. He was still hoping for a miracle, like a successful appeal. Eventually, Doug realized he was going to die in prison and wanted to make the best of his life there. He knew he had one more chip to play, the location of his victim's body. The most important thing for Doug was getting that Xbox. Ironically, he would have received it anyway, but he did not know that. Inherent in making this trade was admitting guilt. The story that Doug told made it look like he just wanted to talk to Venus, but she couldn't resist making him angry. With his narrative, her death was her fault and not due to premeditated murder. With the trade complete, the recovery of the victim's body may bring some peace to her family. As far as Doug, well, he will get to spend the rest of his life with his one true love, his Xbox. Those are my thoughts in the case of Venus and Doug Stewart. Please put any opinions and thoughts in the comment section. They consistently generate an interesting dialogue. As always, I hope you found my analysis of this topic to be informative. Thanks for watching.